Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Strong Black Woman: How a Myth Endangers the Physical and Mental Health of Black Women, by Marita Golden. Narrated by Diana Blue. Introduction. These essays, meditations, conversations, interviews, and imaginings were written in the spring and summer of 2020, that perilous introduction to pandemic and panic, that distance from and longing for a recent past that suddenly seemed, in memory, like nirvana. This book was born of questions about my health. Its identity is hybrid, fractured, and multi-layered. It is a love letter to Black women, a call to arms, and a bomb. Locked down, locked out, quarantined. I did what I have always done. I marshaled words to build bridges and break locks, separating me from what I needed most, what I have always needed, what we all need: community. In this book, there are musings about Black women's health, but essentially, I am investigating the state of our souls. I cite statistics that claim to measure our physical health and reveal the ways that our ill health has been designed and defined by others, and ask how we can reclaim it. What does it mean to be a strong Black woman in this time when we are, as a world, frail, vulnerable, failing? How do we hurt? Where do we hurt? How do we heal? These essays are written in the voice of our sorrow songs and amen corners in all their uncertainty and cumbersome contradictions. These essays came to me as though they had been summoned. This is the book I've been waiting to be woman and human enough to imagine, and then try to write. To write with humility and bravado, the characteristics that set a writer free to piece together a story. I wanted to write a narrative as sturdy and as useful as a quilt. Speaking of the role of the Black writer, James Baldwin said, "We must tell the truth till we can no longer bear it." I have written about the burdens and blessings of Black womanhood until I could no longer bear it. Not because the story is so terrible, rather because of its river-deep, mountain-high beauty, courage, and grace. I stopped not because I was finished, but because this, like all stories, is the beginning. It is an invitation for you to cross its portal and tell a story of your own. We wear the mask. The MRI revealed 2 strokes that I knew nothing about. 2 symptomless, silent strokes that had occurred, according to my doctor, sometime in the past. The MRI revealed the strokes but could not offer clues to when. On 2 occasions, while I was unaware of it, my brain had been under attack. When the blood supply to my brain was cut off. When, as a result, the essential oxygen and nutrients my brain required to function were denied. When my brain cells were destroyed. When 2 sections of my brain essentially died. I sat in the examining room of my doctor, whom my husband and I had been seeing for over 20 years. Dr. Michael Canaday combines joviality with compassion, and as he sat thumbing through the voluminous records, test results, and paperwork of my file, I saw the concern on his face. We had discussed the implications of the results of the MRI, the possibility of another stroke, or a heart attack, and he told me to add a baby aspirin to prevent blood clots that could cause a stroke to my daily regimen of a multivitamin and the cholesterol and high blood pressure medication I took. I was to immediately make an appointment with my cardiologist to have my heart monitored, and I was to make an appointment to return to his office for an echocardiogram, which would scan my heartbeat and identify heart disease. I was given a referral for a carotid duplex scan to identify blockages in my arteries. I sat in the room after Dr. Canaday left to go to his next patient, reeling with emotions. I had done everything right, or thought I had, and it seemed to me that my body was punishing me for it. My husband had suffered 2 small strokes with heart attacks in the last 2 years. In both cases, the stroke symptoms, blurred vision, numbness in his arm, slurred speech, struck in a flash and were gone within 60 seconds the first time and subsided within 5 minutes the second time. But he knew he'd had a stroke. In both cases, he was hospitalized, given a battery of tests, and sent home with modifications to his medications. After 3 days, under the excellent care of a United Nations of doctors and specialists at Washington Hospital Center. My husband was a 24-year survivor of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a cancer that originates in the lymphatic system, which supports the disease-fighting network in the body. After months of hospitalizations and rigorous chemotherapy and radiation that saved his life, the until then dormant diabetes gene that runs in his family activated, and he now lives with type 2 diabetes. I was not diabetic, weighed the same as I had in college, exercised regularly, almost religiously, ate healthy, rarely got a cold, and had no seasonal allergies. I meditated daily, journaled, and often engaged in days of silence to rejuvenate my spirit. And I had a rich, varied, and deeply satisfying network of friends. Nobody believed I was turning 70 soon. My greatest vulnerability, I thought, until that moment in Dr. Canaday's office, was an A-type personality. That is what I told myself. But several years earlier, a malignant, cancerous tumor was found in my rectum during my regular colonoscopy. It was removed, and I did not have to undergo chemotherapy. I followed a regimen, initially of body scans and checkups every 6 months that had revealed no further growth and had now evolved into a single annual checkup. I eagerly sailed into those annual visits with my cancer doctor, like a hyped-up, overachieving student, ready to show off lab tests that would earn me a clean bill of health. So far, they always had. I didn't think of myself as a cancer survivor. A cancerous tumor was found in my rectum, but I wasn't a cancer survivor. Not me. But I was. I am. Thinking of myself as a cancer survivor would have dulled the armor I wore that I worked so hard to keep unscarred and untarnished. And yes, I was on high blood pressure medicine, but I had that under control. As I sat in Dr. Canaday's office alone, attempting to absorb the news that I had experienced 2 strokes, the image of myself that I had crafted over the years as in charge of my body, as nearly invincible, as the poster child for Black female health, vanished. I was dizzy with confusion and sat attempting to beat back a creeping despair. I had had 2 strokes. I was a writer who had spent the last 5 years researching and writing first a novel, then a major piece of journalism, and finally editing an anthology about the disproportionate impact of Alzheimer's disease on African Americans. I was now too familiar with the twice as likely syndrome that resulted in blacks being twice as likely to develop a majority of the most lethal health conditions, from diabetes to obesity to stroke to heart attack. We lead the way and are often, according to statistics, twice as likely to be living with and dying from these disorders. And all of that is one reason we have more Alzheimer's and other dementias. So intellectually, I knew my risk. Now, I owned it. Who was I? What else was my body doing? Apparently, black did crack. I gathered my coat, my purse, and the book I had brought in case of a wait, and walked to the receptionist. The excellent health coverage my husband and I had, thanks to his years teaching in the Washington, D.C. public school system, combined with Medicare, meant that I had no copay and no reason to do more than simply wave goodbye to Miss Thomas, the doctor's receptionist and assistant. Instead, as I put on my coat, I told her in a small, trembling, still shocked voice what the MRI had revealed. They were tiny strokes, so small I had no awareness of them. I smiled weakly, struggling somehow to make lemonade out of the lemons I had been handed. Looking over the top of her glasses as she leaned in close to me, Miss Thomas shook her head and said, "Small or big, a stroke is a stroke." The road to the MRI started a few days after Christmas. Standing up from my computer, I felt the sudden onslaught of a dizziness that briefly made it seem that the room was spinning. I felt unstable and a bit woozy, but I did not think much about it, since the worst of the sensations passed quickly. For the next 2 days, I felt a minor off-centeredness, reminiscent of the sensations I'd had with an ear infection a year earlier. I called my ear, nose, and throat doctor for an appointment later in the week. None of my normal activities were affected, but the dizziness persisted. Then, my blood pressure shot up, and I went to an emergency health care center in my neighborhood. During the 10 hours I spent in the emergency center, I had an electrocardiogram that revealed no issues. During the long emergency room hours of waiting and switching channels on the overhead television filled with infomercials, my blood pressure went down. Yet, because of the dizziness, I was sent to a local hospital for tests that the health center could not provide. By 2 a.m., at the hospital, I was presenting no symptoms and was sent home. A week later, Dr. Canaday ordered an MRI in response to the persistent dizziness. The MRI revealed evidence of 2 minor strokes that had occurred sometime in the past. In addition, I underwent a 2-hour hearing test that revealed no problems and wore a heart monitor that confirmed that my heart was strong. And none of my doctors could tell me what the dizziness meant or signaled. Not Dr. Canaday, not the cardiologist, not my ENT specialist. They all admitted they simply did not know what had happened to me during those 3 days. None of them suspected a stroke. I was concerned, but relieved to know more about my body and health than I had known before. After discussing the dizziness I had experienced and the MRI results with Dr. Canaday, I thought my body was punishing me. In reality, my body was warning me. If not for that bout of dizziness and high blood pressure, I might not have known that I had had 2 strokes. And although I had not wanted to claim the identity of a cancer survivor, I already had an appointment for the fall for my annual post-cancer exam. I was a strong black woman, but clearly not that strong. My living and aging and thoughts about death are shadowed by the lives and deaths of my parents, neither of whom lived to be old. Neither of them lived much longer than the 1970s established life expectancy for Black men and women. My mother died at 63, and my father at 62. They both died when, to my young adult eyes, they appeared to be healthy. A decade before her death, in 1971, my mother had survived and quickly recovered from a cerebral hemorrhage, a massive stroke that initially left her partially paralyzed on her right side. In the months before she died, my mother was overweight and had a bad knee that forced her to periodically use a cane. I knew my mother had health issues, but I never suspected how precarious her health really was. My mother had been deeply impacted by the deaths of a succession of friends with whom she had shared decades-long friendships. Long separated from my father, she had found a beau in a 69-year-old divorced neighbor, and that relationship seemed to both thrill and surprise her. She bragged to anyone who would listen about my achievements as a junior attending American University. And then, one afternoon, I came home and found my mother, sprawled on the bathroom floor, her brown eyes open, cloudy, and unseeing. She had been struck, this time fatally, by another stroke. My father loved El Producto cigars, the Cuban and Puerto Rican tobacco leaves of the popular stogie rolled into an 8-inch long tube of what my father considered heaven, perfumed him with a smoky, sweet aroma that I came to consider my father's signature smell. The popular brand was the favorite of celebrities from Elvis Presley to octogenarian comedian George Burns, who smoked 10 a day. I cherished the colorful paper ring that surrounded the cigar, with its imprint of a svelte, red-dressed, dark-haired woman strumming a small harp. I'd slip the paper ring on my finger and store my childhood treasures in the empty cigar box. Diagnosed with a brain tumor 7 years before his death, my father told his doctor that, as the doctor requested, he'd give up his beloved El Productos. The tumor gradually shrank, and my father celebrated what he thought was a reprieve. But he died of a heart attack in his sleep at 12:15 in the morning of his 62nd birthday. Abstinence from the cigar had saved his brain, but the years of inhaling the comforting yet toxic fumes, and that is what smoking is, had likely damaged his heart. My mother died 6 years short of the 69-year life expectancy for a Black woman back then. My father lived 2 years longer than he was predicted to as a Black man. They had become parents in middle age. Their deaths seemed premature and cruel, and yet my mother needed to lose 40 pounds. She also needed a hobby or interest to engage her mind, to help combat the creeping senility that my uncle suspected she was developing. Years of smoking had ravaged my father's entire body, despite the belief that it only endangers the lungs. I inherited from my parents a genetic predisposition for stroke and heart attack. My parents' deaths instilled in me an absolute rage to live longer than they did, a rage to live long and well, a rage to do what they never got to do, live to be old. If I had not made a nearly sacred vow to myself in the wake of my parents' deaths that I would live a healthy life, those 2 silent strokes might have been debilitating, rather than silent. Black don't crack is an age-old adage rooted in both science and chauvinistic in-your-face race pride. Black skin doesn't age like white skin, and in general, black people age, at least on the surface, with a startling grace. The amount of melanin in black skin is the key. Melanin is a sticky pigment produced by the skin that works like a sunscreen, providing some of the major protection for the skin from UV rays. A specific type of melanin, called eumelanin, creates a dark skin tone. The more eumelanin your body produces, the darker the skin. Even mixed-race people benefit from the protection eumelanin provides. I've used the phrase, "black don't crack," when assessing the physical appearance of African American friends who looked a decade or more younger than their age. Folks have said it about me. The phrase has a kind of magic power. If you are on the receiving end of the phrase, it feels like an anointing, an affirmation. In a society and world where black appearance, style, beauty has been mocked, demonized, and questioned, we could always rely on the trump card of skin that the world paradoxically envies for its ability to resist, longer than other races, the damaging effects of the sun. But the reality is that eventually our skin does age, sag, and wrinkle. And while not common, black people can and do develop skin cancer. Our nonchalance about the supposed superpower of our skin often means that we are most often diagnosed in the later stages of the disease. But we are so much more than our skin. The assertion that black don't crack becomes for black women the belief that not just our skin, but our minds and bodies don't crack. They don't crack and shouldn't and won't. But black women are not just cracking. We are broken. The 3 leading causes of death for African American women are heart attack, cancer, and stroke. Black women are 3 times as likely to die of a heart attack as white women. Too many of us, of all ages and classes, are overweight, obese, have high blood pressure, are stressed out, diabetic, don't get annual checkups, and lack ways to positively crack and then rebuild ourselves. Our bodies, souls, and spirits are a map, a testimony to the ravages of our enslavement, the cruel legacy of legal segregation and lack of access to wealth, good employment, stable housing, and good health care. And our psyches have been twisted and turned inside out by the stories we tell ourselves, and the stories that are told about us, stories that have sometimes saved and sometimes sabotaged us. The strong black woman, the angry black woman, the black woman who says yes to everyone but herself, the black woman who believes Jesus and only Jesus is the answer to every problem, who rejects the idea that therapists, doctors, self-care are also part of Jesus's plan. The superwoman, the invincible superwoman. We've had to be strong. We have good reason to be angry. We say yes over and over to our families because the world so often tells them no. And who wouldn't want to be a superwoman? I was 21 years old and my mother was dying. She lay comatose in a bed in a rehabilitation center for 6 months, wasting away before my eyes. I was a raise the black power fist, afro-wearing, militant activist, and a B+ average student attending American University, and I had already started wearing the mask. The strong black woman mask. During the agonizing months of my mother's illness, death, and the grieving that followed, I told only one person what I was going through, my best friend. Louise and I had attended DC's Western High School together, where we worked on the student newspaper and shared our plans for life after high school, life after college, life as grown women. At American University, we studied philosophy, English, and science, and discovered love and sex and heartbreak with boyfriends returning to the U.S. after a stint in the Peace Corps, or who were from an African nation we had read about in books and hoped to visit one day. We became young women. We became young Black women. Together. Louise was the only person with whom I didn't wear the mask. What I remember. Attending classes and continuing to excel. In fact, tackling my classes with even more rigor and vigor as my mother lay dying. Classes where I was always prepared and always had an opinion, usually informed, were my lifeline in this season of dying. I wrote papers, attended meetings of the Organization of African American Students at the American University, OAS-ATAU, and the Black Student Union, wrote a column for the Eagle, the student newspaper, and worked 20 hours a week in the financial aid office. And on campus, nobody besides Louise knew that my mother was dying. I was 21, and already I was a strong Black woman. Being a strong Black woman meant that you handled your business. You did what you had to do, no matter what. My mother was dying, but I had to continue to be a successful student. Being a strong Black woman meant that you didn't bother others unnecessarily with your pain. In the small apartment where I lived with my mother, my nights were sleepless, tear-filled meltdowns in which in the dark I whispered, shouted, and screamed the questions I was terrified to ask in the light of day. Why would I soon be a motherless child? How would I go on? I woke from those nights wrapped in sheets that held me captive, broke free, showered, put on the mask, and prepared for the performance that would take me through the day. There was a counseling service on campus, but I never once thought of using it. I was estranged from my father. My sister was 10 years older than me, a divorced, single mother of 5 sons, and we were distanced in our grief by old jealousies and suspicions. My uncle was a minister, but I didn't ask him for comfort. My uncle, the emotional and material anchor of my mother's siblings, could be judge, jury, and executioner with one glance. But if I woke every day to the knowledge that my mother was dying, he woke each day aware that he was losing the older sister who had taken him into her home, helped him get on his feet in Washington when he followed her migration from Greensboro, North Carolina. There was a vulnerability that my uncle only revealed when he popped open a can of Schlitz beer at our kitchen table. And now he was grieving too, and he was wearing his own mask. I'd rarely, if ever, seen my mother cry. Maybe she, too, cried in the dark. How I wish she had cried in the light. Despite all that she had made of her life after her arrival in Washington, D.C., as part of the great migration of African Americans from the South, there was a lot she could have cried about. My mother was, like many Black women of her era, a domestic worker. She cleaned the homes and apartments of families of D.C.'s white upper class. But her knack for hitting it big, winning at the numbers, the unofficial lottery of her day, provided her with the money to rent and own several boarding houses in D.C.'s Columbia Heights neighborhood. With my taxi driver father.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?